Okay, so good morning, everyone. From here in Saskatoon, anyways, it's about 11 o'clock in the morning here. And I know for some of you, it's a little bit later. Um, so, as Max said, I will be talking about the work that I've done with engaging parents as partners in early learning. Um, and so we will jump right in. I said to Max before we started, I said, how much how much time do I have? I'm a bit of a storyteller, so I will be cognizant of my time so I don't go
25
too
to 30
over.
minutes. 25 to 30
Yeah.
minutes.
So before I begin our talking about our topics today, I just wanted to acknowledge that I am honored to be speaking on Treaty 6 territory here in Saskatoon and within the homeland of the Métis people. I'm grateful to the First Nations and Métis peoples whose histories, cultures, and care for this land continue to guide us as educators. And as you move through your learning journey, you may find yourself in different traditional territories and Métis homelands. I hope your time in those places is safe, meaningful, and grounded in respect. And as an educator, I hold reconciliation close to my heart. It shapes how I build relationships with students, families, and the communities I walk alongside. Okay, so just quickly a little bit about me. First and foremost, I am a mother. As Max said, I have two children, Jude and Lulu. Jude is 12, and Lulu is just shy of turning 11. Um, they are just the foundation of the work that I do as an early years educator. And I always have them in my heart when teaching and working. So I'm also a teacher. I taught kindergarten and pre-K, and now I'm back to kindergarten. Um, I can't believe it's been 16 years. It makes me feel rather old, actually. Um, but yes, I did. I was happy to be able to take part in my underground grad studies with Deb Pushor, and then doing my master's with her about 11 years ago, which is wild for me to think about too. So I like to start when I'm talking to students that I've taught at the university or my students that I teach currently at Sask Polytechnic here in Saskatchewan with just some questions to sort of guide our thinking while we go into all of these topics that we're going to talk about. So, what is dispositioning? This is something we're going to go into today. And how do we come to unknow our current understandings of professionalism to stand together with parents? What are some new and powerful ways to engage with parents that give them place and voice? And then how do we utilize these funds of knowledge on the school landscape? And as I'm talking today, if there's any questions that you may have, please feel free to put them in the chat. There is going to be a question session at the end. So even if you wanted to write them down and then we can come back to them at the end, that would be great too. So, what is dispositioning? This is something that I did learn from Debbie, and it was something that really stuck with me in my practice. And this is when we come to unknow our understandings of professionalism as someone with power and control, and to re-know it as an act of standing together with parents. So when we come to unknow something, it's not like we're erasing it from our memory. We're simply challenging our discomforts and becoming comfortable with recognizing the need for shift, the need for change. And so when we say things like that, when we want to have a shift, first it comes with the acknowledgement of just challenging those discomforts that we may have as a teacher and what that looks like for us within our classrooms and how do we make that shift. So in the field of parent and family engagement, it's really common to read or hear about the term of capacity building. Capacity building is sometimes a focus of professional development, even for teachers. How do we build parents' capacity to support their children's schooling? That might be something that you've heard before. Sometimes we could even hear, like, how do we build parents' capacity to be better parents? And this is actually a deficit way of thinking and speaking, and it fails to give parents enough credit for already having capacity. So, if we were together in person, I would do this little demonstration in front of you with glasses and real water. But I'll talk about what each of these cups represent. So, the first cup is a parent that lives in poverty. They use the food bank. They're Indigenous. They are a single parent. And generations in the past were part of the 60s scoop. The second cup represents a parent that is a refugee who's new to Canada. Language is a barrier for employment for them. They are receiving social assistance. They have 4 children that are beginning in school for the first time and have no English language. They use the food bank and have no to little access to transportation. The third cup represents a single mother. They do have support from family members, extended family members. They have a balanced relationship with the father of their children, but she was just laid off from her job. The fourth cup represents a 2-parent working household. They've recently made a plan for debt repayment. They have extended family support, but they just experienced a very close death in their family. The last cup has family support from grandparents and extended family. They're a 2-parent working home. They're white and middle class. So when we look at these cups in terms of capacity, there's factors that affect the capacity that parents have, and in turn, that affects their children. So it's important to note that capacity isn't the same always. There are factors that come and go that affect a parent's ability to realize their capacity in a given moment in time. However, due to things like systematic racism, societal factors, availability to resources, and so on, capacity can be affected long term. But what we want to think about as educators, as teachers, as members of society is that a cup, whether empty, partially full, or full, has the same capacity to hold liquid. So the parent's capacity remains the same. And we have the ability as educators to fill their cup or empty it. So this can be done through the supports we offer, the resources that we give, the love we have for our families. So what if then, instead of thinking of our role as one of building parents' capacity, we think of our role as supporting them in actualizing their capacity? And when I think about and talk about this notion of capacity and what that means, I always go back to something that I think Debbie actually talked about when we were doing our master's in parent engagement. And Deb, it's something that I say all the time, and it's fair isn't always equal. So what one parent needs, another may not need that same support. So you could look at all of your families that you have within your classroom and think, how could I possibly reach all of them? How could I possibly give them all the support? But you can't look at it like you don't have enough for all of your students. They all need something different, and it looks different all of the time. And it's not an exhausting role to play. It's actually very fulfilling. So what do we do? Right? What do we do with this information? How can this inform our practice? And first we need to recognize the biases and assumptions that we hold personally. So think back to that idea of dispositioning, right? Shifting, coming to unknow. This can be done from moving from vertical thinking to lateral thinking. Vertical thinking is that first picture there. It's when we jump to the obvious. The parent is at fault. They don't care about their child's schooling. This is based on assumptions, and many in which could be inaccurate, right? Or most likely are. But when we think laterally, we focus on the individual that we may not have a relationship with yet. We describe what we know and explore the reasons for that lack of relationship, and we work on ways to build one. Maybe this parent works multiple jobs. They've had a previous school experience that makes them guarded. But now we have the opportunity to create a new narrative with them. And I often come back to this quote, and it says, many experienced teachers are stuck in a pedagogy that no longer serves the children or themselves. And when we put that into context of this lateral versus vertical thinking, there are many things that we do as teachers that we are stuck in this pedagogy. We are constantly doing the same things we do every single year. And things have changed in society. We know more. We want to do better. We are recognizing that there is a lot of diversity in our classrooms with student needs and language and parent needs and language and resources available and all of those things. And the pedagogy that we have had for many years may not be serving us the same. And so that's part of that shift that we want to look at. So I want to talk about stories of family versus family stories. So in her chapter within the text Portals of Promise, Jolyn Jocelyn states, when we stand on the outside of a family looking in, we tend to make assumptions, to think we know them or know their story, without the knowledge and understanding that their family stories provide us. We often stand in judgment. So stories of family are ones that are told by an outsider. They could be ones that are perpetuated within our school buildings, such as, her kids are always late because she's disorganized. That's probably one that my children's teachers say about me. Or even something along the lines of, that child has lice because their house is dirty, right? Now, family stories in comparison are those that are, as the authors Shockley, Mikolov, and Allen state in their text Engaging Families, they are unspoken memories. They're the ones that we may not hear unless we put ourselves in a place for them to be shared with us. So these family stories, these unspoken memories, these are the ones that strengthen the connection between day and night in the work that we do with our families. We create a shared understanding when we have the ability to hear family stories. But how do we do that? There are many different ways that we can hear family stories that offer us the opportunity to build relationships with families, to hear those intimate funds of knowledge that they hold. So one way is to do relational home visits. And I will go into each of these and how they've informed my practice. Another way is to engage parents on the school landscape. And another way is honoring parent voice. Now, I'll speak to these photos that I have as quickly as I can. As I said, I'm a bit of a storyteller, so I'm going to try and keep myself on check here. The first photo is one of a grandparent in my classroom. We lovingly called her Nanu. Nanu is a word in Bangla for grandmother. Now, this little sweetie pie was in my pre-K class, and she cried every single day. She had a really hard time coming, and we talked to her parents, and her dad said, Nanu will come. And I said, okay, Nanu's going to come. So Nanu came, and she stayed. We had a big comfy chair for her that she would sit in and be a part of our classroom. She became a little bit of a fixture in our room. The kids would play around her, and she would smile and watch them. She didn't have a large English vocabulary, but you could tell from the moments that she shared with us, she just loved being in the classroom. And when she was there with us, her little granddaughter, Sohana, she didn't cry. She was comfortable. She was calm and happy. She joined us in the class, playing and learning. And one day something shifted for us with Nanu. And Sohana had drawn a picture. And she took it to Nanu. And Nanu wrote in Bangla on her picture. And I had several students at the time that were also from Bangladesh. And they were immediately just so excited. And they started bringing their papers to Nanu as well to write their stories. And they would have conversations in Bangla. She would write out their story. And what was really amazing about this is that now their parents could read their child's story. And it gave us this appreciation for the context that language plays within our classroom and how to build that connection for families. And it made us really shift our thinking. Now, I could talk about each one of these, but I'll talk about the last photo because it really builds upon this idea of translanguaging that I learned from Emma Chen. And we saw a need with our families to bridge language for our students and our parents. We saw this through our work with Nanu and then also with Medina. And she's the mother in this picture. And I taught her only son. She has 8 daughters and 1 son. And I was very lucky to teach a few of her children. But the first interaction I had with her was when I taught Hamadou. And what I found was that I went to their home for a home visit, and we didn't have any language between us. They were very new to Canada, had just come from a refugee camp in Ethiopia, but they were excited to have us over. And in that meeting, I had really wanted to invite the parents, Medina and Hussein, to come to the conversation circles that were happening at our school at the time to build language for our EAL families, for parents. And so what happened in those conversation circles is that families could come to the school, their children would come to pre-K with me, and they had time to work on conversational skills in English. And I wanted to ask them to come. And when I went over to their house, it was a little awkward at first because, of course, there was a big language barrier between us. And I couldn't articulate a way to invite them to come over. I was looking at their calendar and talking and pointing at things and trying to explain. And it was really difficult. And I left and thought, I don't know if they understood what I was saying. And the very next day was a conversation circle day. It was on a Wednesday. They were held on Wednesdays. And sure enough, they showed up. And it was so exciting because they were very excited to come. And it completely changed their um, ability to engage at school. Prior to this, they would come, they would drop off the children, wave and leave. And after this, we really started to build relationship. They were excited to be able to come to the classroom after, because when conversation circles had ended, I always told families they could come back. They would spend time in our classrooms until the day ended, and they would be able to use some of those conversational skills with the children, with myself and my EA, and are comfortable setting up the classroom. And all of these moments allowed me to know parents from their own perspective. They weren't based on assumptions that I held, the biases or assumptions of others, or those stories of families that had been shared, whether they be positive or negative. So what does this mean for our practice as educators? We need to build on our new knowledge that we've been gifted through relationships with families. So I want you to ask yourself, as I continue to speak today, is who do you want to be as a teacher of young children? So I want to share with you ways in which my reflecting on my practice when I started working alongside parents really shifted the work that I do. This quote often rings true with me as well, that I arrogantly misused my teacher knowledge. So one of the ways that I began working with parents, like I said, was through relational home visits as a place of learning. Now, this is different than what I used to do. I've been doing home visits since I began teaching 16 years ago. I didn't really know what they were, that this was like even a coined term when I started doing them. It was more that families had kind of invited me to certain things, or kids had invited me to come over to their birthday parties or whatever it was. And I just really loved learning about my families, and I always went. But the information that I gathered during that time, I didn't use it in a way that really built knowledge within my classroom practice. But when I started to do that, this is when I saw significant engagement, and not only with my parents, but also the children that I taught. And putting ourselves in a place to hear those family stories allowed me to set up some invitations, places of learning within my classroom that were built on the context of what I had learned. So this home visit is one that I visited this family very often. They're a family that came to Canada from Syria. And when I had first gone to their home, and Deb knows this family well, we would sit on the floor and they would make this immaculate, incredible spread of food for us every single time. It never mattered what time of day, anything. It was just amazing. And I have to read it from Emma Chen's article that she wrote when she talked about this experience that I had, because prior to this home visit, my EA Jody and we had set up our classroom in our pre-K room. It was the beginning of the year. I set up, as many teachers do in early learning, our little kitchen area, right? And Emma writes it as white Canadian women, they created an invitation reflective of how they lived their home, in their homes and with their families. And this is so true, is that when I set up my classroom, I set it up how my children would play kitchen. I had a little table, little chairs, a little kitchen, and little plates and all of these kind of things set up how I had that experience. But when I went to this family's home and we sat on the floor, and the way that they had set up their invitation for me and Jody is I realized that I'd been setting up and creating a space in my classroom that didn't reflect at all the homes of the families that I taught. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? And I remember Jody and I went back to our classroom after this and we made changes. We immediately took the tables out of the kitchen because many of our families ate on the floor as their cultural practice. And we put a blanket down very similar to what this family had done. And we tried to set things up to reflect what we had seen during that home visit. And what we found is that when we removed the table, the children started to naturally move their play to the floor. And prior to this, when the children had gone to play in that area, Jody and I found it very frustrating because things were always just kind of haphazardly done. Stuff was being dumped out. There was not really a process to the play that was taking place. And we couldn't really quite figure it out. But then once we made this change, we didn't even have to say anything or suggest that they play like how they live at home. It would just naturally came to them. And one thing that was so cute that we learned from the children's play as well is that these little girls, it's not the same child. They're actually identical twins in these photos. And they would instruct all of the children they had to take their shoes off before they came into the kitchen to play. And they would line up their little shoes and they would set up the kitchen play area very similar to how their mom did it at home. And this is actually a different family than the one that we had visited. So it was interesting to see that even for them, this was more natural in their play. And they brought these lived experiences to the classroom with their own knowing. And I would never have been able to do this on my own had I not done those home visits and saw and learned from these families. And through that play that was taking place, the children were making sense of the world around them. They were letting these learnings take place. They were mimicking their understanding at home. And it came to me when we watched the children play, mirroring what we saw within the home, is this notion of the pedagogy of listening, where it's listening with all of our senses. We started to not only pay attention to what we saw during home visits, but also how those families started to interact when they came into our classrooms as well. We saw our families lingering in our classroom, but they didn't sit down in any of the chairs that we had provided. We had kind of like these big cozy chairs in my classroom that I thought would be a really great place for parents to come and sit. I could tell they wanted to stay, but there wasn't a place that had given them the invitation to do so in a way that they felt comfortable. And we reflected back on the time we had spent in our family's home. And many of our families, like I said, they had meals together on the floor, but many of them also sat and gathered on the floor. So we decided to remove our legs from the tables in our classroom. We had, those round kind of classroom tables, and we put pillows down instead. And what we found is that our families would stay and visit. Instead of standing, they would sit on the floor. The shift in their comfortability in our classroom completely changed. It only made sense that we changed our practices to meet these values and practices that we saw with the families that we taught and lived and worked with. And because we felt that here we are as a guest in this community, and we wanted to allow families to feel that comfortability to come in and stay and engage, right? So another way that we can learn through home visits is putting family culture as a place of learning. So, like I had said, I had gone to my little Hamadou's house and visited with his mom, Medina. In that time, I also met her oldest daughter, Hawa. This is Hawa in the middle picture. I ended up teaching Hawa's children as well. And when we went to Hamadou's house that first time, they introduced us to Buna. And if you're not familiar with Buna, it's a traditional communal coffee making ceremony. And it's really central to part of social and cultural life in Ethiopia and Eritrean culture. And what it is, it involves roasting green beans, coffee beans, grinding them, and then brewing them in a coffee traditional clay pot, which you can see there on the floor. It's called a jibena. And it's typically a ceremony that's performed by women. And it's a time for friends and families to gather and share conversations, have popcorn even. And it takes place in front of the guests. So it's something that's not, we don't just go and push the button on our Nespresso like I did this morning. It's a process that is made in front of us. So that first time that Jody and I went to Hamadou's house, it was such an interesting experience because it felt a little awkward at first, but then at the same time, they brought out all of these pieces that you see here in that middle picture, and they started to set it up in the living room. And Jody and I had no idea what any of this was. And they put these little green beans into this pot and turned on this little flame burner in their living room. And we're talking and they're roasting. And I thought, like, what are they making? And then you could smell it. And I remember I turned to Jody and I was like, they're making coffee. And if anyone knows me, I love coffee. And I was super excited. And they roasted these beans. And I remember how she was the one that made it for us that day when we were at her mom's house. And she stood up and she had that jibena, and it has quite a narrow opening at the top. And the cups that they pour into are quite small. And she stood and she poured them into the cup from a standing position. And I was just engrossed. It was amazing. It was such an incredible process to see. And the more that we got to know the family, we spent a lot of time there, and they totally pulled us in with coffee all of the time. And we would go there and watch this process. Now, when Hawa's children came along and they came to pre-K, we happened to have a more extended Ethiopian presence, not only within our school, but in my classroom that year as well. And we had gone for another home visit to our family's homes, and we decided to share this process with the children in our classroom. And you can see we showed them pictures from being at their home that day, and you can see little Hasna, my little honey. She was so excited when we started sharing photos of her home with the children. And we let the kids teach the children about making buna. And I actually found, which I didn't even know I would be able to find, I actually found a clay jibena pot, a tiny little one on Etsy that I purchased for my classroom. And we set up a little play space in our kitchen for making for making buna. And the kids were so excited about it. I made little word cards that had the heritage language of my Ethiopian children on it, like a picture of coffee with the word buna, another card with the same picture and the English word coffee. I did the same thing for important items that were used during that ceremony, like jabena, being the pot. And my children were so excited to not only see the photos of the items that existed in their homes. I used actual photos that I had taken in their home, but they could also write the word in their own writing in their family journals, which is something that I'll talk about as well. They had this immense sense of pride to be able to share this with their peers. My Canadian-born children were also excited to be able to do the same thing. They made connections to similar items in their own homes. Like, my mommy makes coffee at breakfast in the coffee pot at my house too. And in taking part in these practices, I felt that I was enabling the children to engage across languages and cultural practices. They truly valued the language of one another, and it really shifted what we ended up doing in our classroom. So from that piece of that simple act of going for Buna, we ended up taking it even deeper into our classroom practices. I had an incredible intern at the time that was very crafty. And you can see it, this is our little dollhouse. And she made a tiny little jabena and a Buna station out of clay that the kids could play with in the dollhouse. And we had this space set up. I asked Medina if she had any pictures of her home in Ethiopia to share with us. And she shared this one picture with me. And it was from there we ended up creating a space that represented the way that they lived in their home country within my classroom as well. They slept outside, and we ended up making a little mat in our dollhouse area as well. And in thinking of even that dollhouse and then what we created, we had started setting up the jabena in the dollhouse, but then we removed the dollhouse and set it up as an outdoor play space for the children, because one of the things that one of my kids would say all the time was they missed sleeping under the stars. And so we had that available for them to play and represent their play with. We had a two-sided little cardboard that was either a day scene or a night scene, and they could play in with their dolls in that space as well. So here is where dispositioning becomes noticeable within that context of a classroom. So although I have a strong foundation as an educator in language and literacy practices in an early learning classroom and a strong pedagogy and my own belief system, through this learning from my families, I allowed myself to unknow those understandings that I held as a professional, as someone with power and control, right? And I wanted to, as Deb says, walk alongside parents, take that knowledge that they were bringing of home, of culture, of religion, of language, and bring it into the classroom. And this is also where translanguaging also becomes a powerful tool as well. Because when we do things like simply taking a picture of coffee and writing that word Buna, using it in our classroom. I had one little Métis boy in my classroom, and he loved making me coffee every day. I had a Keurig in my classroom, and he wouldn't call it coffee anymore. He'd say, "Teacher, I make you your Buna," he would say, and he would bring me my little coffee because he had to do it himself. But what we were doing in that is that we were bridging teacher and learner between home and school by acknowledging the language and making that connection for the children too. So my children that were learning English, they had that knowledge of Buna, coffee, and we would use those words together as well. So we're making that bridge of Buna is coffee. And it was when I started to do this that language really started to evolve in my classroom as well. And we saw a very high engagement from the children when we were teaching. Now, I took this even farther, and we were doing this within our classroom, and I learned and gained so much knowledge about family, culture, and language that I saw a value in sharing this with the staff. We had many students in our school, like I said, whose homes originated in Ethiopia. And so I was invited by my administration to share about parent engagement during a professional development day. And so I invited Medina and Hawa to come and make the staff Buna and share that practice with us. And when they did that, they also shared not only the cultural and family practice of making Buna, but they also shared their journey to Canada and their settlement here. Here's a picture of me holding Hasna, and she wanted to come up as I was introducing Medina's husband Hussein to the staff, and he spoke with his daughter, who helped him translate to the staff about their experience in Canada. Now, not only did I do this with my staff, but I ended up taking this into my post-secondary classrooms as well, and had my families come to my early childhood courses at the university and also share this practice with students. One of the things that I found and realized when I began teaching post-secondary courses is that so many beginning teachers or student teachers have a fear of working with families and don't know how to start that relationship. So when I saw how well this worked with our staff, with me in my classroom, I wanted to take it even further there. So before we kind of wrap up our morning together, I want to also just talk about how this moved into the work that I do with family journals. So this process for me is based on the Engaging Families text that is written by Shockley, Micallef, and Allen. I always tell people it's an oldie, but it's a goodie. I think it was written in 1995, but it's really powerful. And what I would do is that children would engage in journal writing at school, and they would share at home what they wrote, and then parents could respond. So it could be really something simple, like in this picture here, that I'd taken a picture of something that they had done, wrote down the student's voice in pre-K. That's what we do in kindergarten. They are starting to write for themselves. And then I would send it home and ask families to respond to what their children had worked on that day. And I did this based on literacy practices primarily. And based on the parents' response, I could offer support. I could praise. I could, see what work was happening at home. And when I did this as well, the children were extending their literacy network. So they read and they wrote with siblings, with parents, with grandparents, and all of those people within their homes got to know who they were as readers and writers as well, and share those family stories with us. following the examples of that text, I never told families how to respond. And I didn't have a specific like academic agenda. I focused on literacy, but it wasn't, I wanted to see what their fluency was or anything like that. It was very free to each family on how they were going to have that dialogue between their child and myself, between home and school. So I just wanted the writing to be responsive. So within that text, it outlines how the educators designed and worked through these home journals. And the authors share the work with children on their literacy experiences at home and at school, and what their intention was to bridge the gap between home and school, creating relationships with parents and building the literacy along the way. And I found this to be very powerful in my classroom as well. I actually also took this into assignments that I did with my post-secondary students because it was such a powerful teaching tool for myself as an educator. And one of the things that these authors state in their text is when we listen to and read family stories and journal entries, we developed funds of knowledge for teaching. We saw children through their families' eyes, in addition to our own. We saw them in ways that helped us teach the whole child more completely. And I also used family journals to talk about kind of big ideas. So this was a journal entry from a child in my class when we had started talking about residential schools in Saskatchewan. And they had drawn a picture and it says, "Sad guys at the school. The kids were sad." And what I did in this is I do this occasionally where I just write a little note about what we were learning about to give the families context. And then the families would respond to their child's learning as well. So,
sorry,
yep.
sorry, Melanie. Yeah. I think we should be kind of wrapping up. And there is a question already. Can you share the name of the Engaging Families text?
Yes, you bet.
Yeah.
And I can actually put that into the chat. So as we are just kind of wrapping up here, just thinking about what are some current events and practices in your school or classroom that you could shift and change. What's one idea, thought, or practice? And then reflecting on yourself is, how am I living out my beliefs in practice? What does that look like for you? So I wanted to pull up those questions. So yeah, we can go into questions if you want. I'll leave my thing up just in case if there's some questions that maybe I have some photos of and stuff that people may have.